Okay. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining today's webinar. You should be able to hear us now, but if you can't, please enter in the chat box below if you're having any audio problems, and we will try to help you. My name is Julia Crowley, and I work for the TOPS program. So today's webinar is about the CMAM Toolkit, Rapid Startup Resource for Emergency Nutrition Personnel. And then before we get started, I want to go over a few logistical details. Please note that in terms of audio, we've turned off microphones for participants. So if you have any questions or comments or you would want additional information, please enter in the chat box, which should be on the right side of your screen. And your questions will either be answered during the presentation or immediately following the presentation. Also, you should see on your screen two questions. One is if you work on emergency or development programs, and one is if you are familiar with the CMAM Toolkit. If you would be able to answer those briefly, it would be greatly appreciated. Okay. So now, with nothing else said, we're going to go to the presentation, and this is Paul Wasicki from Save the Children, who works on emergency nutrition.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Julia, for the introduction, and welcome everyone for to take part in this particular what I would call a wonderful session. And we really appreciate sparing time, especially some of you who are coming from different time zones that may not be in line with our time zone here in DC. Just to mention once again, I'm Paul Wasicki. I work for Save the Children US as an emergency nutrition advisor. And I'm glad to take you through the CMAM Toolkit today. And before I do that, I'd like to appreciate my colleagues who worked on this toolkit, the first version, the 2011 one, of which the revision was based. Some of them are online, some are with me. I wouldn't be able to mention all their names, but the work they put into the toolkit is much appreciated. So today I'll take you back to Julia to introduce the TOPS program, which is hosting this webinar, but also supported the revision exercise for the toolkit. Then we've seen from the initial feedback a number of colleagues have not used the toolkit in the past, so we'll go through a brief background of the toolkit, and then I'll take you through the actual content of the toolkit, and then look briefly into the revision, what has been revised. I will not go through everything, but we'll pick a few examples of the components of the toolkit that we've revised. And then I will discuss briefly the next steps with the toolkit, in which I'm looking forward to all of you being part of, either as contributors or as users or as ambassadors. Then we'll talk briefly about some of the technical advisory group members, which I'll explain more on later, who participated in the revision process. Then we'll have an opportunity to respond to your questions, if you have any. In case we may not be able to respond to all of them, we'll definitely be available as we move on with the toolkit use. So in terms of questions, in case there is a burning one, drop it on the chat box. Those that we can be able to carry with us to the end of the presentation will do so. So feel very free to drop as many as you can. Thank you. Julia?
Great. So brief overview to TOPS. So TOPS is funded by USAID Food for Peace. TOPS actually stands for very clearly technical and operational performance support. So the idea really for TOPS is to really bring together implementers and donors to really share and learn information, best practices, promising practices and knowledge and food assistance, which includes nutrition and food security, to basically improve programs around the world. So we do this through a few ways. One of this is through task forces, which are made up of a few different, we have task forces on nutrition, we have task forces on monitoring and evaluation, social and behavior change, commodity management, and knowledge management. And we also have a small grants program, which is what was this. This was a small grants program, which is designed to help implementers test innovative new ideas, new tools, really develop something that's of use to the broader food security and nutrition community. And this is a small grants program, small grants funded exercise here. TOPS also does knowledge sharing meetings on key topics around the world. And we have a website where this will be posted after. It's called the Food Security and Nutrition Network, fsnnetwork.org. So please go there to check it out. It has links of lots of resources and upcoming tools and events. We also do, the final thing is we do some types of technical capacity strengthening, which is we do trainings on certain topics in various countries around the world. So in terms of who's part of the TOPS program, it was 7 years, from 2010 to 2017. It was $30 million, and it is led by a consortium group, Food for the Hungry, Core Group, Mercy Corps, Tango International, and each of these members are focusing on a different technical area. So for example, Food for the Hungry focuses on social and behavior change. Mercy Corps focuses on agriculture and natural resource management. Core Group focuses on knowledge management. Tango International focuses on monitoring and evaluation. And Save the Children focuses on nutrition and commodity management and overall program management. So that's pretty much it about TOPS. So I'm going to turn it over right now back to Paul.
All right, thanks, Julia. Yeah, just to mention at the beginning is that when we sent out the invite, we had indicated that we'll take the participants through sort of a walk over the toolkit, how to use different components. But I just wanted to mention this wouldn't be possible because of a few reasons. One, we had a huge number of you guys who expressed interest, and therefore that would present some challenges around navigating the toolkit. But also, we're also still finalizing the latest, the revised version of the toolkit. So we have some copyright issues around having it posted officially. But then at some point, as you see down there, the link that is the first link to revised CMAM Toolkit takes you straight to the Google Drive that has the revised tools with a good number of tools that existed in the previous toolkit. So if you search CMAM Toolkit, you are most likely going to find the previous toolkit. So a quick background is that the toolkit is a collection of tools, guidelines that are often required by program managers to begin implementation of CMAM programs, depending on the titles that we give them, but different cadres of individuals who implement CMAM programs, especially at the beginning of a new emergency or a new program. One would easily get into the toolkit and bring down most, if not all, the documents, tools, and protocols that they may need to be able to kick off and implement efficiently. And just to caution that the toolkit is not a recreation of existing resources. This one came out quite a lot during the revision process. It's basically trying to put together different resources out there from different organizations, a lot of evidence that is available, and in some situations you can actually find two different types of tools in the toolkit that basically can be used in a CMAM response. And it's important to note that the toolkit is not meant to replace national protocols, and most of the areas or countries where we implement CMAM nowadays, there's some form of national guideline. So it's always important to refer to those. But in case there are certain components of the guidelines or protocols that are not available, then we can always adapt the components of the toolkit in that case. So what you're seeing right here is how the toolkit is. This is the version 1 of the toolkit. So as I mentioned, if you search, this is what you will find. And this is the one that was done in 2011, and it's the basis of which the revision has been taking place. And for those of you who've indicated they've used the toolkit, it is likely that this is what you've used. So the link, as I mentioned, just to reiterate, the link that is down there is to the Google Drive of the revised tools and documents, which we are yet to post on this site. Yeah, just to explain what is under that first part of the page, it just breaks down different aspects of the toolkit. So there's that bit of determining the need, for example. So once you click onto that, then it takes you to all the tools that will be able to help an implementer determine the need to be able to implement a CMAM program. Yeah, so just briefly to highlight, for those who, this might be boring for those who are very much used to the toolkit, but just to briefly go through the components that we have in the revised folder. We do have the revised toolkit. So we do have a folder that has practical training materials, and this came out of the user feedback, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Basically outlining what we believe are most of the training components for CMAM implementation that can be used for both managers and field implementers. Then another interesting bit that was proposed is a blanket supplementary feeding program, which is increasingly being used, maybe in not in many places, but most of the time during the initial phase of an emergency. And users basically responded that more often than not, it's usually one of the busiest moments of the response, and one wouldn't really want to waste a lot of time designing tools, reporting documents, etc. So this came out as a very key need for one to be able to kick off a blanket supplementary feeding program. Then anthropometrics, basically the measurements, which include weight for height. We have measuring edema and how to be able to convert that, how to be able to interpret that so that a child can be referred to the right treatment. Then we have assessments, and under assessments we've also included surveys. So it has quite a bit around initial rapid assessment, which is also usually a very critical phase of an emergency response. So one would be able to pull a couple of tools out of it and be able to conduct the assessment quickly and analyze as well. But also, in case there's need for an in-depth survey, I'll get into that a little bit later. Then we have all the different forms that are used in CMAM. During the revision process, somebody said CMAM tends to be just about forms. There are so many referral forms. We have patient forms, etc. So we have a number of them in there, which can again be contextualized based on where one is working. Then there's a bit on monitoring, evaluation, supervision, and reporting. In the current toolkit, we have M&E, then we have supervision, and then we have reporting. But then during the revision process, there was a proposal, and this one I would be glad to get thoughts as well, that there's a very close link between reporting, supervision, evaluation, and monitoring. And some of the tools actually could be used for more than one of those components. Presently they are together, but then based on some of the thoughts that we'll receive, we can always think on how to work it out. Then organization, how to organize a CMAM program, the different components, how to organize an OTP, SFP, stabilization center, etc. And if I'm using too many acronyms, please, you can drop a message there. But SFP is a targeted supplementary feeding program, which is like the sister to blanket supplementary feeding program, meant to treat moderate acutely malnourished children and pregnant lactating women. Then stabilization center is inpatient care for severely malnourished children, oftentimes, who have medical complications. Then outpatient therapeutic program is where we treat children with severe acute malnutrition, but without medical complications, and it's usually community-based treatment. Then we have protocols. Again, one of the sections that there was a lot of feedback. Apparently there are lots and lots of protocols out there, tried and tested. And we've tried to put a number of them together. And this is one area the revision team members actually suggested there might be need to sort of check with different users on different protocols before they are officially disseminated. Then staffing, just to guide putting together the human resource for CMAM programming, so different job descriptions. There's a little bit on the initial induction or sensitization that one may want to take them through, etc. Numbers that are needed for various components as well. Then supplies, which has come out as a very, I would say, a very sensitive bit of CMAM programming in terms of how to estimate, how to monitor, how to manage them, and both at the field level, but also one thing that came out, managing supplies at national level, for example, with the nutrition cluster. Yeah, so that's more or less what we have in the revised toolkit. And when you go to the link to the revised CMAM toolkit, that's where it will take you. Yeah, and in addition to the various sections, we also have the tools that are quite critical in the implementation of CMAM, which I mentioned earlier, is the determining the need for intervention, but also we have planning by program type. So we have the different components of CMAM. So the tools that are in there will be able to help one plan on what they really need, basically the planning process as part of the program cycle management. Then the third tool is caseload estimation. Also it was a fairly contentious bit, different ways of estimating caseload. We have some methodologies that are proposed by the lead agencies, some proposed by key agencies in the implementation of certain aspects of CMAM. But then we have a number of tools there from different organizations as well as the nutrition cluster. And that also links quite a bit to the supply needs estimation, which is very dependent on how you estimate your caseload. So those are some of the key tools that, in addition to the previous sections that you'll find in the new toolkit. Yeah, so this is an example of what we have, caseload calculator. One of them, there are actually more than one in the toolkit. And as you can see down there, you can be able to go through the instructions on how to use it. And then there is an example of, basically taking one through the instructions that are listed in the first sheet. And then the next one is now the calculation tool. So it sometimes can actually be used by the lowest level of program management cadre in CMAM, as long as we get our estimates right. And then it can also be, most of the tools, I should have mentioned earlier, can be downloaded and used offline, because once they are locked within the toolkit, such that one cannot be able to change much in it. So it's easier to download and use it offline. And then, as I mentioned, it will be very great. We will be very grateful to get feedback on the same. Another important aspect of the toolkit is the integration of IYCF into CMAM. Of course, for most of us who are engaged in emergency nutrition intervention, we appreciate the importance of IYCF and IYCFE in nutrition programming. And one of the challenges that personally I've seen is most actors are not quite, they appreciate it, but they're not quite clear on how to go about IYCF and IYCFE programming within CMAM. So we'll sometimes just have very basic programming added to CMAM, and even in terms of presenting our proposals, people tend to deliberately leave out IYCF, IYCFE, because we are not quite sure of what aspects to add onto the CMAM proposals we are designing. So we have a component on that. But also important to note is there's another tool that Save the Children has developed, which is the IYCFE toolkit, and the link is down there. A very comprehensive tool. I personally like it quite a lot, and the feedback we've received is that it's very, very user friendly. So when implementing our CMAM interventions, just to be sure that we have a source where we can get, I think I would call it almost every IYCFE tool that you need and documents, so in addition to what we have within the CMAM toolkit. Sorry. Yeah, so having said that, I'm not quite sure if there is any burning question on the background, the toolkit. There's none, huh? Okay,
just
so
a comment that it's great to see the training section added to the toolkit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, it was one of the, from the user feedback, that's one bit that most of them really wanted. In fact, one individual said that once they have the training slides, they may just go ahead and kick off their implementation. But of course, we have many other tools that could be useful for that. So thanks for that feedback. So in terms of this, the toolkit revision, this was informed by the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, it was done in 2011, 2012, so that's quite some time. And CMAM, as we know, is evolving quite fast, and therefore a lot of evidence has been generated, new ones, good practices in the field. There are new standards. Most national governments are coming up with national standards with really localized experiences in there. So there was need to relook into the toolkit and update it with such. And around that time, during the 2011-2015 phase of the toolkit, we also collected user feedback from those who had used it, and there were a couple of suggestions that came in. I've just mentioned about the training, so that also informed the need to revise it. And of course also was quite encouraging that people are actually using the toolkit and they would want to see the best out of it. Then we also, as a result, we established a technical advisory group which is made up of different partners, INGOs mostly, and the UN. Colleagues who've been in this game for some time, different levels of expertise, different interests in CMAM, and they also brought in their technical inputs into it, and a couple of suggestions came from them, which also informed the revision process. And I know maybe some colleagues who are part of the webinar were consulted in one way or the other during the revision process. So this is an example of feedback that came from one of the users, which I'll just read it. I don't think someone without any knowledge of CMAM programs would be able to navigate the toolkit well. So this is the previous version, the one I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. I get the feeling that you need to know what you are looking for to be able to find it. It almost needs a document guide to guide the novice through what they need to find. So this is an example. We have the great contents in there, but then perhaps it's more user-friendly to guys who are part of the game already, and therefore that's why I mentioned the one of the things we'll really try to work on is the presentation, at least at the first page, so that someone can be able to quickly get what they are looking for. And we have good examples of how this is done. I'll get you back to the IYCFE toolkit. If you have time, you'll click through it. It's very user-friendly, I would imagine. So those are some of the things that have been done in the past and you can be able to learn from. So I picked a few examples of components that have gone through the revision process. And as I mentioned, this is one area that seem to be, guys are quite interested in. So I just wanted to quickly run through what is in it. But then, of course, when you get time later on, you can scan through and provide feedback possibly as well. So we have a total of 10 sessions in it. And the first one covers this basically an overview into CMAM programming, and could be useful to, it could be, some components of it could be useful in advocacy or sensitization of government officials who may not necessarily be technical people. So that could pull some components to be able to sensitize and talk to individuals about what one wants to do and the importance of CMAM. But also there are components that are important for technical people. So one can use it in different ways for different reasons. Then we have the inpatient care, which basically most cases it's the stabilization center that takes care of the severely malnourished with medical complications. So this one is quite lengthy, as you can imagine, with all the different aspects of inpatient treatment, and has borrowed quite a lot from some of the training guidelines from national government, as well as the FANTA training guidelines as well. And in my view, it's one that could actually be used even for training pediatricians, for example, those who may not necessarily be interested in management of MAM or community outreach, but basically dealing with children within the stabilization center or the nutrition wing of the pediatric ward, as some of them refer to it. So it's also quite comprehensive, and it has additional documents or reference documents and training guides that could be useful as well. Then outpatient, basically concentrating a little bit more on the OTP, outpatient therapeutic care. And there was a discussion as to whether we should have inpatient and outpatient combined. But then there was a feeling that sometimes there's need to train these people in different locations. Some organizations are just probably implementing inpatient, and therefore it would be easier just to have the two training packages separated. But then if there's need to train all the staff in both, then one can be able to have them anyway. Then management of moderate acute malnutrition, a few slides in there, different approaches to it as well, but then it was fairly consultative and basically focusing on the children 6 to 59 who have moderate acute malnutrition, but there are also components that focus on pregnant lactating women, including routine medication in the management of moderate acute malnutrition. But also just to mention something that came in around BSFP, because the BSFP proposal came in a little later, but then we had to add some slides there because of the links between targeted supplementary feeding and blanket supplementary feeding. Of course, one may argue that they may not be very related, but the colleagues who are working on the training bit of the toolkit felt that perhaps for the time being we just need to put them together. But then if there's need to really pull out a different training package for BSFP, then that would still be fine. Then we have a community outreach component, which is not part of the previous version of the toolkit. And in this, it's largely around documents that are available out there to guide community outreach, some of the checklists that someone needs, who do we need to reach out to when you get on the ground, how to monitor community outreach, for example, and a few other very important aspects. And the linkage, of course, the linkage that community outreach provides between the different components of CMAM. And then the other bit is monitoring, reporting, and evaluation. And this bit we, as I believe most of us are aware, another tool that Save the Children and partners have been advocating for and using for the last couple of years is the CMAM report, former MRP, mandatory reporting package. So we borrowed quite a bit from that package. And a few other agency-specific documents on monitoring, reporting, and evaluation. And this bit also came out as very critical, especially when you want to assure quality of CMAM programming. Measurements and definitions, obviously, to be able to identify children and individuals to be admitted or discharged or referred within the different components of CMAM. Then supplies, as I mentioned earlier on. And quite important was something on failure to respond, and especially around inpatient care, but just a bit on outpatient care as well, and what to do with that. Sometimes we've had situations where teams are not quite sure on what to do and cases are not responding to treatment, whether to refer for medical attention, whether to refer to a different program, and how to report on that as well, because it's also a factor of quality in CMAM programming. Then another thing that I believe most of us are also aware of is CMAMI, community-based management of acute malnutrition in infants. Of course, still work in progress, but then there was a strong feeling that we need something to guide, because I'll give an example of the Horn of Africa currently, the Horn of Africa crisis, where some countries have actually agreed to go on with managing acute malnutrition in infants, but then there are really no existing guidelines out there, and therefore the need is actually clear, and therefore having something that people could easily refer to was seen as critical at this phase. But just to mention that, definitely being an ongoing work, I know colleagues who are really putting efforts into this will improve it with time. Yeah, so that's more or less like the way it appears on Google Drive. So that the component, just an example, the training component. So you have the CMAM Toolkit and then training. So you will have all these training slides in there, but also a few other documents which are not appearing. Things like pre-testing question, sample pre-test questions, post-test, attendance sheets, basic things of that, and reference modules are also available, and even handouts as well.
There's a question.
Yeah, there's a question.
Yeah.
Yep.
So from Colleen, that said, I haven't reviewed, but have you, but I'm wondering if you have included some practical exercises for use in the training. This is a component of the FANTA training materials that are very nice.
Yeah, thanks, Colleen. Yeah, good question. There are practical exercises, but then, and specifically from FANTA, we found them quite useful. But then also looking around copyright. So in most instances, they were picked just the way they are. So they are very much available, but then we still acknowledge them as FANTA documents. But then that's one area definitely we'll continue reaching out, especially because we found very good materials from the national training guidelines as well to be able to improve that bit. But yeah, there are. Maybe not as many, but there are some practical training exercises. Yeah.
Okay, and then the second question from Judy online is, what is the CMAMI listed under, and is there a subdirectory?
So I would assume within the training package. No, so it's just one of the sessions. It's because the thinking was perhaps it's for most of the responses now, it perhaps could be the only need, so to speak, for the staff. So somebody could just pull the available documents, take their staff through the training. So it's one of the sessions. I think it's session 10 within the toolkit. Is there any other? Yeah, thanks. Yeah, those questions are quite useful. Keep dropping them in. So the bit on anthropometrics, just to highlight, nothing much changed here because what we had were really, what are being used right now. There are a few proposals that came from what SMART uses, for example. But more or less what we have, what we've added are the new growth standards, just for ease of access. Personally, when the last time I was looking for the chart, the WHO 2006 charts, I think it took me almost 15 to 20 minutes to find them on the WHO site, and I think that's useful time during an emergency response. So they are available. Somebody can easily pull them down, laminate, and send out to the field. And also split into boys and girls, as well as 0 to 2 and 2 to 5, 0 to 2 years and 2 to 5 years, as per the latest guideline. So that's just an example of the forms that we are using that are included in the latest one, and this one again was borrowed quite a lot from the CMAM report, and most of the forms that we have are just for consistency, but also we realized that the CMAM reports had gone through quite a lot of consultations. And some very good inputs had come in. There are some that have not been taken up by certain national governments, but they are really news and people appreciate. So that's why we really try to get as much as possible from the CMAM report. But also we have what some people call the traditional reporting forms very much available if one would depending on what the government wants in their context, they could still use that. Another interesting bit that we have in the revised version is the integration bit. So CMAM integration into the other sectors, which also came out as a very important component. And interestingly, as we tried to look around, apart from IOICF and obviously health, there wasn't so much documentation around direct CMAM integration with these other sectors. And therefore, what the team decided to do was to get some available documents, some really talking about general nutrition integration with, for example, gender, and could somehow guide the integration of those particular aspects into CMAM. And just to, there's a page here just to show how the document is. So that's an example of child protection and the documents that that are related to integration. So I'll take the example of the Child Protection Working Group of the Protection Cluster guidelines. In that particular one, there's a description of what is in it, and then there's the link to be able to access the entire publication. So if one would just look into the summary of what is contained in that particular publication, document, or guideline, then once they click on the link, then they are taken straight to the document. So that might not be very easy, but at least one would be able to know what they are looking for before they start downloading the entire document, only to realize perhaps what they are looking for is not there. So we have different categories of integration. So there's gender, child protection, IOICF, health, WASH, food security, etc.
So there's another question online from Peter, and he wanted to know, what about the integration of the HPSS piece, and was that included?
Yeah, that's a good one. So in this particular version, no, because we would really want to get if there is information or documents out there, guidelines on this. The closest is integration of general health services. But if there is anything that we could be able to add, that would be really, really great. But I know there's a lot of discussion around this, and definitely I would just hope that we'll very soon get guidelines on how to integrate MHPSS into CMAM and even overall nutrition programming. What I know, there's quite a lot around linkages with infant and young child feeding right now, but then we'll really be glad to get additional documents to include in there. Yeah. So we're not doing badly with time. Yeah. So the next steps with the CMAM Toolkit. So I should have mentioned this earlier. The first version of the toolkit has been translated into French, and that is the aim for the second version as well. Most of the components that are owned by the revision team have been revised, but also, as I mentioned earlier, there are some tools from other organizations that either have French translations or may need to be translated, and for that there is need to get approval to go ahead. But then in making the user experience more interesting, definitely the French version will be looking the same way as the English bit. In situations where we'll not be able to translate or find a translated version, then there will be a description of the document in French. Unfortunately, it might only be downloaded in English. But just to mention, this is one aspect that came out during the user feedback as well. There's an increasing demand for CMAM use in the French-speaking parts of the world. And to start with, for example, the training bit has been translated into French, as well as the integration and assessment and surveys. Yeah, so this is just to appreciate guys who've been part of the process, and just to again revisit the issue of the technical advisory group. I know some of them are probably online, and but just to mention that the technical advisory group that led the revision process was made up of various organizations. So we had representation from SCF, but also the angle of using the smart materials from SCF Canada, I think should be mentioned. Then CDC as well, GOAL was with us. IMC through, for those of us who are aware of the technical rapid response team, the CMAM advisor was part of the revision process as well. I've mentioned about the smart connection with SCF. UNICEF, of course, we know UNICEF has many guidelines out there. Their participation was great. And then, of course, the then CMAM forum, we'll update that with time, but yeah, of course, documents that came from the CMAM forum, and also supporting the user feedback collection. And then obviously Save the Children, not only facilitating the revision process, but also we had a number of Save the Children colleagues being part of the revision process. And then USAID, of course, through TOP, supporting the revision process, which we really appreciate. We hope to continue working along with them. And then WHO guidelines that were picked from their that are available for use, just to recognize them as well. So that's more like the composition of people who either directly or indirectly, or organizations that directly or indirectly supported the revision process of the toolkit. Yeah, so I think we've taken a couple of questions, but then we have some time for Julia to guide that, to take any other, including comments and suggestions. Those ones will also be appreciated.
So there's one question from Dr. Antene online, who asked, is there a costing tool or guide included in the CMAM toolkit?
Yes, there is. There is a costing tool, which again was fairly, I would say, it was a huge discussion point, different ways of doing things, but it really has to be contextualized, because there were discussions around activity-based costing or overall program-based costing, and the different issues around different contexts. But there is an initial guidance on that. Thanks, Dr. Antene. Yeah.
So Joan Jennings from TOPS also said there is some promotion of breastfeeding support in the integration section for nutrition. And Hailu also commented that she was happy to see the MIRA included in the toolkit.
Thanks for that. And for the MIRA bit, of course, it seems to be the way the UN is, the humanitarian community is pushing assessment, and sometimes organizations do not have really all the documents they need to be able to conduct the initial multi-sector assessment. So that's why it's there. So thanks for that, Hailu. So I'll...
So if there's no other questions or comments, if there's no other questions or comments, this is just us. We'll end the webinar, but all of the materials and the recording of the presentation will be available online at the FSN Network website after this. And we will also send the links as a follow-up email to everyone who registered to this meeting in a few days. So that will be coming. Sarah, did you want to say something?
I have a question, if you don't mind, from the...
Please do.
I wondered, Paul, in terms of when folks are interested, at the moment all the tools are on the Google Drive, but if you had a sense of when folks might look again at the website where the old version was, for when it might be hosted over there, or when the French version might be available.
Yeah, thanks for that. The tentative plan is to have these ready before the end of the month. Actually, the current project should be ending in June, end of June, and our aim is to also have everything done by then. Yeah, so it's going to be a busy moment, and maybe just to add, to connect the two, Julia's comment and Sarah's question is, as you get access to these, we'd be very glad to get your initial feedbacks as well. And yeah, but we aim to have everything available online by the end of April. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much, colleagues, and stay tuned. Looking forward to engaging with all of you a little bit more. We are aiming to have the toolkit as a live document from the other experiences, just to continue collecting as much field level experience as possible, and being able to engage as many people as possible out there. So thank you so much for your time.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming.
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 5 minutes.